Welcome, my lovelies, to another amazing episode of You Make It Happen. And I'm going to try to do as many solo as I do guests because I do know that I trend to drone on in guest episodes. I'm aware. I know that I go long in guest episodes, but I enjoy guest episodes. And it's fun to have somebody that's not just me in an echo chamber talking to the void. You guys get it. You get it. So in this episode, we're going to get into why your mental health matters more than you think. Thank you to everyone who has liked, subscribed, follow me on YouTube, follow me on Instagram, on Facebook, on TikTok, and everyone who has rated the podcast. If you haven't, please rate the podcast 5 stars on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on YouTube. I'm Missy the Traveler. I am Missy the Traveler on Instagram and Missy.Traveler on TikTok. You Make It Happen podcast at gmail.com if you want to send the podcast a question or have comments, or just need someone to talk to for your mental health. I get to as many replies as I possibly can. Let's get into it. So why does your mental health matter? I know that seems like it would be a rhetorical question, right? So I'm going to hit you with some fun facts to start with. Lack of a strong connection or strong relationships increases mortality by... I'm just waiting for you to fill in the blank in your brain here, or out loud. Increases mortality by 5%, increases mortality by 20%, increases mortality by 90%. Like, what are y'all's guesses? Email them to me, send them to me, social media me, whatever. So the facts that I have found say that lack of strong connection or strong relationships increases mortality by 50%. And that's more than obesity, more than lack of physical exercise, and it's about the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day, which is, I think, more than, I don't know how many are in a pack. I think that's more than a pack. That sounds pretty detrimental to your physical health, not just your mental health, your physical health. That is your mental health, but your mental health greatly impacts your physical health, as we've talked about in many episodes before, as I talked about with, I don't know, every single guest that's ever been on. And y'all have heard me say it over and over again, and you've even heard pretty much every guest I've had on say it, that our mental health is so important, that our mental health dictates our physical health. And if you don't believe that, look it up, Google it, search it, dive down the rabbit hole, go to the library, ask somebody who is qualified to answer you. Don't maybe ask random people. You can ask random people, you're going to get predominantly the answer is yes, even from random people, if you take a big enough survey. Anyway, another little fun fact, the survival tactics that kept us alive as children, protecting our brain, protecting us in general, they really screw us up as adults. Because what was something that kept you alive in childhood by being quiet, being subservient, or, I don't know, fill in the blank here. Oh, you know what? I do know. I thought of some. People-pleasing, withdrawing, hypervigilance, or being just overly responsible, growing up and being the parent to your parent, or being the parent to a younger sibling. These are all things that may keep us alive as a child, but screw us the F up in adulthood. It doesn't help for developing skills like emotion regulation, because we basically don't know how to do that. And in severe cases, children mentally disconnect, which, you know what word I'm coming up with? That's disassociation. We can disassociate, numb out, or just be completely not present. What are the things that create this in our childhood? Neglect, abuse, instability, witnessing violence, all of the above. Anything that overwhelms our brains is considered traumatic. That's my understanding of the definition of trauma. Anything that overwhelms our brains, something that your brain can't handle, that's considered traumatic. So what does that look like? How does that manifest? And I'm going to give you a little example. Let's say the hurt self, somebody who's not doing the work, who hasn't done the work, or who, for whatever reason, is going internal. We'll say something like, or external for that matter, blaming outside sources, blaming the world, or blaming themselves instead of taking accountability and learning and healing. So the hurt self might say something like, I always end up in bad relationships. And if that sounds like you, that's okay. It takes a lot of work to get to the healing self, which may make a statement like, I learned relationship patterns in childhood, and now I'm repeating something that I can unlearn with time, effort, patience, dedication, etc. You have to unlearn it. Another example, the hurt self might say something like, how could they betray me like that? And the healed self, or the healing self, would say, they revealed how they feel about themselves. Their actions reflect their character, not my worth. I choose to focus on me and my healing. And another example, hurt self, I should have known better. And we've all said that. We're human beings. This is just part of being human. And when you do the work, when you start doing the work, when you get further down and you've found a good fit therapist, or you're just doing the work on your own as much as you possibly can. And I say on your own, we're never really alone. You got to talk to other people. You got to have somebody to bounce the information off of, hopefully somebody who's emotionally intelligent, or somebody who's done their work, or a life coach, or somebody who specializes in attachment recovery coaching, that sort of thing. And yes, that is a shameless plug. The hurt self might say, I should have known better. And the healing self, I did the best I could at the time. What we resist persists. Ignoring emotion, stuffing it down, that's ultimately going to drag it out and amplify it. It's going to make it worse. And I know that a lot of you listening, if not all of you listening, logically know this. If you don't deal with it, it's going to deal with you. I know you know this. I'm going to reference again The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. It's a heavier, harder trauma book. Don't recommend that as a first jumping off point. If you're further into the journey, if you've done a lot of work on yourself, if you're years into healing, absolutely. Maybe you're ready for that heavy, trauma story-filled book, and it's a goldmine of information. If you're not that far down the rabbit hole of healing and working on yourself, I do not recommend starting with that one. And it amplifies my point, and it's demonstrative of what I'm trying to say, which is the body does keep the score. It physically remembers the traumas that you've experienced. It physically remembers your depression, your anxiety, whatever you're going through, your mental illness. We all struggle with mental illness one way or another, whether it's mild depression or mild anxiety or a little bit of OCD or a little bit of social anxiety, or maybe it's something more serious like narcissistic personality disorder. Narcissists generally don't find themselves listening to mental health, self-help podcasts, so that's probably not a good example for my listeners. But I bet you can probably think of somebody who you know is likely a narcissist, and they don't often get diagnosed because, yep, they do not seek help. They do not think they have a problem. You're the problem, which is also a symptom of borderline personality disorder or undiagnosed borderline personality disorder, which I've talked about in previous episodes, but it bears repeating. It's worth repeating here, which is, I don't have a problem. You have a problem. I'm not drunk. You're drunk. I don't have a problem. You have a problem. Okay, buddy. When you start to get riled up and upset by people like that, NPD, BPD, you name it, and they're pointing the finger at you and saying, you need to work on your mental health and you need to work out your issues and you are the issue here and you're I'm not mentally ill. You're mentally ill. Go get some help. Okay, thanks. Just remember that they are mirroring. So they are using you as a mirror for their insecurities, their shame, their unmet childhood needs, their core wounds, their core narrative from childhood is, I'm not good enough. It's always rooted in shame. Almost always. I shouldn't say always, because always and never are too much. It's almost always rooted in shame. I can't think of an example where it's not, but I hate using the word always because it's just so absolute. And I try not to speak in absolutes. I'm going to segue now into something that's also useful for our mental health and can benefit us, because it's something that was revelational to me in therapy when I got to that. It took me, like I've mentioned in past episodes, it took me a couple years in therapy just processing unresolved anger, just processing repressed anger. And I'm talking decades of repressed anger that turned into horrific major depressive disorder. That's one of the possible sources of depression, is repressed anger specifically as an emotion, but repressed emotions in general is a source of depression. And sometimes there's clinical depression, which has no explicable cause. And I understand that. And I think I'm curious the psychology behind that. Because if you have no explicable cause, you've never had any childhood trauma, that doesn't exist, as we've talked about in previous episodes. I kind of wonder if that's somebody that, if you have clinical depression and you've done a lot of work on yourself, is it generational trauma? If you still have clinical depression and you've done a ton of work on yourself, you've done a ton of healing, you've done a lot of the shame work and childhood core wounds and childhood abandonment issues, if there are any, just childhood trauma healing as much as possible, and you still have clinical depression without any sort of cause, I don't know. I'm curious the psychology behind clinical depression, supposedly without any cause. Okay. And we have generations of trauma living within us, unless your grandparents did their healing. And if you were born when I'm making this, before I made this podcast, sometime in the 90s, 2000s, 2010, 80s, 70s, 60s, 50s, 40s, those people, our grandparents and parents, did not do the work on themselves. Predominantly. Not saying always or never, just predominantly. So something that I discovered was revelational in therapy, circling back, is how our thoughts can lie to us. How our thoughts can be completely full of it. And I'm going to go with a little example here. In one of my favorite references, which is a movie reference, in case y'all didn't know, I love the movies. So cognitive bias. All right, y'all know the movie My Cousin Vinny, and if you don't, it's hilarious. Funniest lawyer movie ever made, if not just a great comedy. So in the movie, there's an eyewitness, and the eyewitness, it's funny because the eyewitness is completely unreliable, even though they completely witnessed, allegedly, this crime, this murder take place. The eyewitness was proven on the stand to be wholly unreliable. Why is that? Because of cognitive bias. So your brain sees what it wants to see. It follows the story that you make up and it fills in the blanks. Even when you think there are no blanks, there are blanks. Even though you thought you may not actually have seen what you thought you saw, or even though you thought you saw something that actually happened, it's not always as black and white as that. In fact, it's usually not as black and white as that. You may have forgotten the person that you did see, or your brain blocked out this person in the corner because your brain was following the narrative of, oh, that guy did it. And so you didn't even see the other guy. Even though you didn't witness this person commit this crime, you watched them run out. And so you automatically assumed that they were guilty. Brene Brown talks about this, that we're hardwired to fill in the blanks. Our brain will make up stories. And one of the most powerful things that she ever gave me and gave herself in the world is the tool of, and get ready, write this down if you're not driving. If you can do this and you can pause for a moment, write this down. This is a key phrase. The story I'm telling myself. The story I'm telling myself, which is from Brene Brown and from her work. Using that has just been absolutely revelational. The story I'm telling myself when you didn't respond to my text is that you don't love me, or you don't want to see me, or whatever. And that was my anxious attachment previously. And that would be something that I would fill in. And sometimes I would say it to the person I'm dating. The story I'm telling myself when you don't respond back to me for 24 hours is that you're no longer interested in seeing me, or something to that effect. The story I'm telling myself. How powerful is that? Let's just take that. Thank you, Brene, for coming up with this genius, or the story I'm making up in my head, or whatever. The story I'm telling myself is just, I think, concise, and I liked it. That is powerful because our brains do fill in the gaps, because we don't always think things through, or we do think it through, and our thoughts lie to us. Our thoughts can betray us. Even our witnessing of things with our naked eye can betray us. And it's why eyewitness statements are notoriously unreliable in criminal cases or in civil cases. Just eyewitness statements in general, notoriously unreliable. And you would think, oh, that person saw that. How could that be unreliable? They watched that happen. How could that be unreliable? because our brains fill in the gaps because of the way you were raised, because of the color of your skin, because of your economic status, because of your economic status growing up, because of your core wounds, because your narrative, because of your childhood trauma, because of the environment you live in, because of the area of the world you live in, because of the culture you live in. You name it. So many factors go into how we view the world. And it is the same for how we view events. You're using the same lens to view that crime that just happened, that you just randomly were witness to. This is just an example. As you do the rest of the world when you're driving about your day, when you're getting groceries, when you're whatever. It doesn't matter. It's the same lens. You have that lens. You can't take off that lens. You can't take off the white privilege lens, or you can't take off the disenfranchised minority worldview lens. You name it. You can't remove your particular lens, and that dramatically affects how you see things, even things that are right in front of you. Okay, so this is a good segue to mention, I get this a lot. You look like you have it all together. You look like you're fully healed. You've done so much work. You're totally secure now. You've got it all figured out, right? And that's really flattering. I can assure you, my lovelies, I do not. When I was a kid, growing up, I was taught no emotion is good emotion, other than happy. You're allowed to be happy. You're allowed to be joyful. Yeah, nothing else. Nothing else. You'll be punished. Okay, no big deal. No big deal. You just be punished. No big deal. What terrifies a kid more? Shame and punishment. Those are scary. The scariest things for kids. Like feeling shame or being shamed, being told you're not good enough or that you're too much, and getting in trouble, which, yeah. Getting physically assaulted. I know there's lots of other scary scenarios. I'm just listing a couple, big two, average for a lot of kids. So, yeah, I was taught that emotions were bad. I was taught that shame and vulnerability were bad things. Shame is weakness. Definitely shame is weakness. That's what I was taught growing up. Brene Brown mentions this on her Netflix special. Just a little poll in the audience. Who was taught weakness is shameful growing up or something to that effect? Vulnerability is weakness. And I was taught vulnerability is weakness, and therefore it was shaming. And I was punished when I was in private with my dad. He threatened to hit me, and I remember being scared because he was 500 or 600 pounds. And what 6-year-old or a little kid isn't going to be scared completely that they're literally going to die if their dad, who towers over them at 5'10 and 500, 600 pounds, is going to hit them? And he would raise his hand but never actually hit me. So it was an odd dynamic. I think he realized, oh, I'm turning into my dad, or who knows. I don't know much about my grandfathers on either side. My parents were both tight-lipped, just would not talk about their dads. And I'm sure that was because there was so much shame and abuse. I'd be willing to bet something big that they were assaulted, abused, who knows what. Who knows what. Yeah. When we're kids and we're taught that feelings are bad things, what do you think we grow up to believe? The things that shape us as children shape us as adults, and they become bad coping skills that just cause so many problems for us as adults. Not allowed to show emotion. Anger may be okay, but you better not. You're a girl, no anger for you. Sadness, grief, shame, vulnerability, distress, depression, frustration, irritation. None of those things were allowed. And so those are the things that manifested the most, and I ended up being a bully in grade school because of it. I took my pain out on other people because I wasn't allowed to show pain or vulnerability at home. And so I took my pain out on weaker kids. And I still have shame about that. I'm working through it, and I have worked through it, and I continue to work through it. And I apologized to my friend who got the brunt of it when we were kids, and she said something very validating and comforting. She said, I don't remember you being like a bully to me. I remember we had our moments and we had some fights, but I don't remember you being a bully overall. Like, I don't look at our relationship when we were kids, like 3rd grade up until high school, as a bully victim relationship. And I was like, okay, that's really good, because I look back at it and I'm like, holy crap, I was a bully to her, and I would pull her hair and scratch her, and I just remember being a horrible little kid. And I only really did it to my friend who I knew wouldn't fight back. Yeah, I carry a lot of shame about that. Even now, I'm still working on it. I'm in my 40s now, and I since did a lot of work on myself, and I got to this point a year or two ago where I reconnected with her on social media and sent her a message and said, hey, I'm really sorry. I wholeheartedly apologize. I know that words can't make up for what I did as a child, but maybe I'm just remembering the bad moments from our relationship from childhood of where I would pick on her. And I don't think I did it every day because she obviously doesn't have any pent up feelings or shame or anger or resentment about it, because she was like, no, she's done a lot of work on herself. She's done a lot of healing, because our parents from the 80s, they were pretty messed up. If you had parents in the 80s, 70s, 60s, maybe just 90s or even 2000s and before, now mental health has become a topic of conversation. This podcast is in existence because mental health is no longer massively stigmatized like it used to be, and how it still is in other countries, which is sad and unfortunate. And I hope that they catch up. Not that the United States is leading the way in mental health progression, but we're doing better than a lot of places, which is one of the few areas we can say that about. Let's say it, because let's take advantage of it while we can. So let's circle back for a moment to something we were talking about earlier, which is the cognitive bias, especially for those that are still struggling with anxious attachment, which is me as well. I still struggle with my anxious moments and my triggers. It's really easy. I shouldn't say really easy. It's a lot easier. There we go. It's a lot easier to be secure and healing and doing well when you're not in a relationship. A lot easier. Get a lot more triggered when you're in a relationship, dating, etc. Here's a message when you're dating that we often receive. They don't love me, or maybe they can't love you. Let's be clear. It's not that they don't, it's that they can't. Or maybe it is that they don't. It doesn't matter. Either they don't or they can't. And that translates to the I'm not good enough. I'm not enough. I'm not worthy. I'm not lovable. And it's not true. And this is an example of how our thoughts lie to us, because that's what we think when we internalize. They don't love me. I'm not enough. What can I do? How can I fix it? How can I be better? Or just the I'm not enough. So the person can not want you or not love you or just not be capable of loving you and are still lovable. And you are still enough just as you are. Those two things can and often are true at the same time. And our brains will lie to us. They will lie to us and bring up those core wounds, those messages from childhood. They come back. Even if you don't know that was a message from your childhood, it will play out in your adult relationships over and over again, like we've talked about in a previous episode, or I talked about in a previous episode with the parent-child dynamic playing out. Yes, I am sorry to say it, because it's not like it's good news, it's depressing news, right? But this is why we're here, to be better. This is why we're here. Story time. I was an entirely different person than I used to be when I was severely anxiously attached. I was a lot more insecure. I didn't love myself. I was generally an arse, as a few times I've mentioned in previous episodes, but more specifically, I routinely participated in black and white thinking. It was my thought process. If he doesn't text me, he doesn't like me. And if he wanted to, he would. And that's just utter nonsense. It's complete and utter nonsense. And I love that Sabrina debunked this in her podcast and with various viral videos that she's had online, talks about the fact that it's complete garbage. If he wanted to, he would. No, absolutely not. That's like saying, if you don't want to have allergies, just don't. It's like saying, if you don't want to have anxiety, just think it. And you won't. Just think the pain away. Yeah, I just watched Bridget Jones's Baby on the flight home, and Patrick Dempsey. Just think the pain away. And there's Emma Thompson saying, you're squeezing a human being out of your vagina. I'd like to see him think the pain away. It's just as silly as saying, if I didn't want to have anxiety, I simply wouldn't. I've just decided I'm not going to be anxious anymore. I'm tired of this. Yeah, also that depression, that's gone now. I'm great now. That's just ridiculous. Okay, I don't want to drone on too long in this solo episode, so I'm going to wrap it up here as soon as I can. I just want to emphasize that what I was talking about, this is the same thing. There are men and women and people, non binary, anybody in general that desperately want to be loved and want to accept love and have love in their life and affection, and they can't get over their stuff because they haven't done the work, they haven't put in the time, the trauma healing, and the hard effort that it takes to be able to accept love and receive it and not push away a secure, healthy relationship or a secure, healthy person, or even somebody that just wants to love them, secure or not. And I am no exception. Can't tell you how many secure men that I dated in the past and completely rejected, pushed away. I don't even know. I don't even know because I don't know who was secure and who wasn't. But I know that there were plenty of perfectly reasonable, seemingly nice, decent guys that I was like, oh, I don't feel the vibe, or I don't feel that spark or that chemistry or those butterflies, which, as I talked about in the previous episode, on the spark, go listen to the bonus episode on the spark because I don't have time to reiterate the whole thing. Go listen to the bonus episode on the spark. I pushed away plenty of secure guys in my past dating history, and to be clear, that was not intentional. It's just my past personal experience. And had I known about attachment theory, I don't know that it would have done me any good because I hadn't done the work. So even if I knew I was rejecting secure guys, not that I was overwhelmed with a repertoire of secure choices, but I know there have been secure guys that I've rejected in the past. But even if I knew that, I don't know that I would have been able to change it because that anxious avoidant dance is powerful. So powerful. So one of my major points to this story is don't beat yourself up. If you're anxiously attached, avoidant, fearful avoidant, aka disorganized, don't beat yourself up. You're doing the best that you can. And if you choose to do the work on yourself, great. And if you want to follow my podcast or talk to me about coaching services, I'm here for it. And no worries if not. I only work with clients that want to work with me and who we both find that both sides determines it's a good fit. All right. I've droned on long enough about why your mental health is so important, why taking care of your mental health is so important, and how it dramatically affects your physical health. People give themselves cancer just from stress, from childhood, from core wounds, from all kinds of crap. But people can give themselves, and routinely do, give themselves cancer. Perfectly healthy people with no genetic history, no reason to be getting cancer, get cancer, and they wonder why. I don't wonder why. I don't wonder why at all. Anyway, all right, let's get into some travel tips because those are funsies. And this episode was heavy, so let's get into something a little bit lighter. Travel tip number 1, public transportation versus private transportation. Sometimes private is just as affordable, if not like a few cents or a few dollars more than public. It depends on the country, depends on where you're at, depends on peak times, etc. Download the Bolt app. It's used in the majority of Europe if you're headed to Europe. I don't know about Asia or Southeast Asia. I haven't looked into Bolt for traveling to Asia, so I can't answer that definitively one way or the other. And I can tell you the last time I was in Europe just exploring around, not visiting family or anything, I was in Portugal, and taking a Bolt was roughly the same cost as taking the metro. Less steps and stairs and crap that I had to deal with. And when your feet are already tired, sometimes this comes in really handy. This is the tip, is research and look online and say Rome to Rio. That's another tip for you. It's tip number 2, is a great app to use to determine the best way to get from point A to point B in foreign countries, in different locations, and generally worldwide. And it's not always accurate. I always like to cross-reference it with Google Maps and see, okay, London says I should go from here to here in Google Maps, but Rome to Rio says use this bus route, and it doesn't always get as detailed as Google Maps. I really like Google Maps. So I like both. I'll check Rome to Rio for a broader, especially longer distance travel between point A and point B, and then I'll check Google Maps for shorter, more local things. And Google Maps is not always accurate, but it's usually pretty darn accurate. So that's 1 and 2. So number 3, the Flighty app. I've mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again. It was one that I got from Rami, and I love it. What a great suggestion. That thing is worth it. I haven't paid for the pro version. I just have the free version, and it is totally worth downloading and putting in the flights and the information on your phone. And I think you have to manually enter the flights and that information, but it's so worth it. You can see, I got updates last time I was traveling in Europe, which was just a week or so ago, and it was saying, oh, this flight is delayed and this is 20 minutes and this is going to be at gate A37. And it updated by the minute, and it had information sooner than the airport seemed to, or the airport staff, because it was accurate. I remember waiting for this flight in Riga in Latvia, and it was like, it's 20 minutes delayed, and there's nothing on the board. Nothing on the board said 20 minutes delayed. There's no staff there, nobody updating anything. And by the time staff got there, the plane was supposed to be there and we were supposed to be boarding already. So yeah, they were 20 minutes delayed. So it was super useful. What a great app. And your fourth tip for the day, a budget money saving tip: grocery stores are a great source for budget meals. And granted, it depends on where you're at. And I'm not talking about a mini mart, although some of those in London have some delicious ready-made food, especially if they're a little Tesco, little Waitrose, whatever. In England, those are great. Marks and Spencer, oh my gosh, great ready-made food. But just in general, like a grocery store, get off the train. I just got off the train in Austria, and I was like, oh, I'm staying at a hotel this time, so I'm not going to have a fridge full of food. I'm not going to be with my family. I'm not going to have access to whatever snacks I want or whatever is available. I should grab a couple things and just have some food on hand. And it's so much more reasonably priced to get stuff at a grocery store than to go out to eat. And the food was delicious. It was a huge wall of deli meats. I say wall, it was like a refrigerator case, a huge refrigerator case. Must have been like 50 feet long. I don't know. I didn't measure it, but it was gigantic, and it had a massive selection of deli meats. And right across from the actual deli, which had schnitzel sandwiches and ready-made, homemade looking dishes. It was just, I got a schnitzel sandwich and it was delicious. And it was less than €5 for a schnitzel sandwich with a Kaiser bun, with mayo, and some deli meat and some fresh squeezed orange juice, because I love that about Europe. Fresh squeezed orange juice is everywhere. Much more common to find fresh squeezed than concentrated crap or whatever that we usually have in the States, which I hate. But anyway, I digress. Getting off a path. Oh my gosh, I can't imagine that happening. I know you guys are shocked that I would get off the path. I want to say thank you to all the listeners. Thank you for all the support. And thank you for the questions. Thank you for the comments. Please do continue to write in. Send me your questions. Send me your comments. I get to as much as I possibly can. And I will address as many as I can on the podcast to answer your questions. Because if I think it's a good question or valuable for other people to hear, I will reiterate that and go over my response. And if it's not something I can answer, then I will try to refer you to some place to find the answer. I do my best. I do my best. We're all doing our best. That's the doing your best story from Brene Brown. If you've listened to every episode so far, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, go back. They're valuable. Go back and listen to the other episodes. They're so good. I'm a little bit biased. Just a little. All right. As always, don't forget, work your stuff out. Please don't do it on other people. And we'll see you next episode. Thanks so much for listening.